I bought this house for free, and it's an income producing property, meaning it makes me money every single month. No, it's not actually this one, it's this one, and I didn't get it for free because I inherited it or because there's a sinkhole underneath it. I'll show you guys exactly how I did it and how you can do the same thing. A little less than a year ago, I was looking for my second rental property just after finishing the renovations on the first house I ever bought. And at this time, I realized that I didn't have enough money to buy another property and I wasn't willing to live in it. If you don't already know, you can get an FHA loan with only a 3.5% down payment if you're willing to live in the property for the first year. So if you find yourself a $250,000 house that would make a great rental property and you're willing to live in there for at least a year, you can use an FHA loan and only put 3.5% down or $8,750 instead of what all the other investors would need, which is 20% or $50,000. But because I wasn't willing to live in the property, this wasn't going to be possible. And without being able to afford the down payment, you might think that I'm all out of options. But that's not actually the case. See, there's another type of financing outside of traditional or bank financing called creative financing. This is a word that basically means any type of financing that isn't done with a bank. And the two most common types of creative financing in real estate are probably sub 2 and seller finance. Sub 2 or subject to means you're going to buy the property subject to the current financing. So you're not going to go get your own loan when you buy the property. You're actually going to assume the previous owner's loan and make all of your payments towards that. At first, you might wonder, why would anyone even want to do a subject to deal? But a common situation that some people find themselves in is they buy a house with a low down payment and then for whatever reason need to sell the house. Maybe they get a job in a different city and they need to sell this house, but they don't have a ton of equity inside it. And this is a problem because number one, they need to sell the house for at least the same price that they bought it for. Plus they're going to pay 6% realtor fees and closing costs and maybe potentially repairs. With all these things combined, they might actually have to pay money in order to sell their house. In this case, someone might be willing to take a sub 2 deal so that they don't have to come out of pocket any money. Now let's talk about seller financing. This is usually when the owner owns the property outright, doesn't have a loan on it, and acts like the bank themselves. So instead of going to the bank to get a loan to buy the house, you're actually going to finance with the seller directly. You get to negotiate the down payment, the purchase price, the monthly payments, the interest rate, and the term or length of the loan. The beauty with seller finance is that you get to play around with all the terms, and this can make a property that's not a good investment for somebody else a great investment for you, because maybe you negotiate that there's no down payment, or you're going to cash flow $1,000 a month because you negotiated a 1% interest rate. And again, if you're wondering why someone would do a seller finance deal, well, they might not have to pay the 6% realtor fees or do any repairs. They're also not going to get a huge tax bill in this year. Instead, they're going to get monthly payments, which they might prefer. I've heard of situations pretty commonly of older sellers wanting to seller finance their properties because not only do they not want to deal with the property anymore, but they love the passive income and they also don't want a huge tax bill. And if they're going to pass down this property to their family, they don't have to worry about their family managing the property or selling it for the right price. They can actually pass down the seller finance note. And instead of giving your family $1 million if you're worried that they might blow it, you can just give them a seller finance note, which might be $5,000 a month for the next 20 years. Now, the other reason that someone's going to seller finance their property is to get their purchase price number. A lot of people want to get their specific price, but the problem is investors can really only negotiate that price because everything else is set by the bank, the interest rate, the down payment, the length of the payments, and all the other terms. However, with seller financing, sometimes you can actually pay a little bit more for the property because you might be getting better terms. Maybe there's no down payment or a lower interest rate, really whatever makes the deal better for you. Now, in order to find these deals, you can look on market or on the MLS or on Zillow, and you can search for specific words like owner finance, seller finance, creative finance, owner carry. But to be honest, a lot of these deals are actually not going to be on the market. And when a deal is not on the market, it's simply named an off-market deal. And that's actually where I found my property. Now, there's a ton of different ways to find off-market deals. One common method is to go driving for dollars. It's where you drive around your neighborhood and look for distressed homes. Another method is door knocking. Another method is bandit signs. Those are those signs that say, "We buy homes for all cash," or something like that, usually on the side of the road or near a stoplight. Or you could do what I did, which is cold calling. I used a service called Batch Leads to find a list of homeowners who owned single family homes but didn't live there, which meant that the properties were either rented out or just sitting there vacant, and they had owned the properties for at least a couple years. You can do this with a service that I mentioned earlier, or there's a ton of others that basically do the exact same thing, and then you just got to start calling. Now, in all fairness, it's not like the first call I ever made was an instant success. And to be honest, most people are not going to want creative finance, but If you don't have a lot of money to get started like I didn't have, then you need to replace money with hustle. So after about 1,000 calls, literally, I'm not joking, I came across this house and the seller told me that it was currently rented out and he was open to selling it, but a lot of people had called in the past and the numbers had never really worked out. The key to creative finance is connecting with the owner and solving problems. After I spoke to the owner, I realized that everybody else who had tried pitching him had tried lowballing him, because that's all they could negotiate, the purchase price. And it makes sense, right? They're investors, they're trying to get a deal, but he's trying to get closer to market rate. So for every investor that had called on this property, the price was just too high. But this is where I saw a rental property in great condition in an area that I loved with a long-term tenant that was severely under rented. So I asked him a crazy question. What do you want? Which was probably the first time anyone had ever asked him that. And he told me that all he really wanted was $100,000. He didn't need the money desperately. He didn't even need the money right now. He was just tired of being a landlord, and because he had never raised rents, he was only making $50 a month, which just wasn't worth his time. And this is where it all started to make sense. No wonder nobody had been able to buy the property so far. They were all going about it the wrong way. Instead of beating him up on the price, I just negotiated the terms. I first asked him if he had any loans on the property. He told me that he owned 50% of the property and had a loan for the other 50%, meaning he had a $50,000 equity position and he had a $50,000 mortgage. This means that I couldn't sell or finance the deal because he didn't own the property outright, so I had to do a little bit of maneuvering. This might sound complicated if you've never done a creative finance deal before, but it's actually simple. Here is how the deal breaks down. I would buy the house for $100,000 over a 5-year term. I would then service his mortgage during that time, plus pay him additional $50 monthly payments. On top of that, I would put $2,500 down at closing and an additional $2,500 down 6 months later. Let's go over this a little bit more in depth, starting with the $100,000 purchase price. Since he had $50,000 in equity and $50,000 in a loan, I had to do a combination of seller finance and subject to. Since he didn't need the money right away, we did a 5-year balloon, meaning in 5 years, I'm going to completely cash him out by either selling the property and paying him and his loan, or refinancing the property with my own loan, paying off his equity and his loan completely. I'm still paying him $50 a month, which is roughly what he was making while he was renting out the property. And I paid him $2,500 down at closing and an additional $2,500 down 6 months later, which is more than he was going to make in the next 5 years anyways. In simple terms, I just gave him exactly what he wanted. He got his $100,000 purchase price and he gave me the terms I needed to make the deal work. Hopefully this makes sense on why he took the deal, but why does the deal work for me? And how did I get this property for $0 like I claimed in the title? Well, first, I didn't use a normal bank loan, so I didn't have to put down 20%, which would have been $20,000. Instead, I only needed to put a total of $5,000 down. Well, when I got the property, I knew I could raise rents immediately because they hadn't been raised in years, and I was able to raise the rents from around $800 a month to over $1,200 a month, netting me over $500 a month in positive cash flow. Since the tenant stayed, I never had to put any more money into the deal, and the second $2,500 that I put down 6 months after closing was completely paid for by the tenant's cash flow alone. And at this point, it's been almost a year since I've owned the property, and I've made over $5,000 in cash flow, meaning I have all the money back that I ever put into the deal. Now, yes, technically I did need money to get into this deal, but I really only needed $2,500 and I was able to recoup all of my money in less than a year, meaning I'm in this deal for $0. I know you're probably thinking two things right now. Everything I just said was super complicated and you're never going to learn how to do one of these deals. But remember that I didn't know any of this before doing this deal. I learned everything on the fly and you can too. And if you're still confused, just go back and watch the last few minutes again. The other thing that you're probably thinking is this is a 1 in a million deal. And while I agree that these deals probably aren't the most common, you can find them if you're willing to grind. If you're starting with no money or experience, you just have to take the leap. That's honestly what made me do a deal like this. When you have no options, you just got to figure it out. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like. It helps me a ton. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next one.